Taos in Baltimore, who knew, loved, worked for, worked with, were friends with, dined with, laughed with, touched the trophy with. David Modell. I can't think of anybody who was put in a more monumental position directly by David than my next guest. He is our partner here at WNST.net. He joins us frequently and often through the generosity of Living Classrooms Foundation, his generosity. We welcome Brian Billick back on, our head coach here. Of course, you can follow him out on Twitter. You know, Coach, I haven't heard you talk about David, and I know you and I have talked a lot privately about David during his illness and before that, and obviously the event we did together last May where he got up and began our night after Governor Hogan with an incredible speech. And there's something you always say in your speeches, and I know you were down in Florida. Someone hit me on my Facebook, said, "Why wasn't Coach at David's services?" And I knew you had events that you just couldn't move. But you say in your speeches a lot of time, you twist your ring around in front of everybody, not just the Eagles fans and the other people you're looking to offend. But you say, I earned the ring, but they're going to come and try to take it away. They're going to take away the accomplishment because I only won one, or the defense was this, or the quarterback was that, or I didn't win another one, or whatever. With David, in retrospect, one of the things that I'm really trying to get out on the front end here is I don't think time has served his deeds as well as the people on the inside like us that knew what was going on. And I think that's really unfortunate, Coach.
Well, and for those that are around it know the truth of it, that David's fingerprints were all over what we were able to do in winning that first championship. David is the one that hired me. David is the first one of the Baltimore Ravens who reached out to me. I remember it very well. The night that we came in, I was with the Minnesota Vikings, and we were playing the Ravens, and obviously it was a tough year. It was the year we were on that 15-1 run, and things were going good. And I remember walking around that new stadium, admiring it, and up comes David Modell, and was the first time that he had reached out, and without anything specific. Obviously that wasn't the place, but basically just to introduce himself, and was very proud of the stadium and pointing that out. And that was our first contact. And David headed up the group, everybody within the organization, with Ozzie and Kevin Byrne and John Wooten, and of course all under the auspices of Art, in terms of putting that together and bringing me to Baltimore. And when I got here, found out very readily that David was the guy. He was going to be the grease that made everything work. He was the one that pushed and prodded, and if anybody needed anything, if anybody needed for something to happen, David was going to make that happen. He was energetic. He was always right up front, and is a huge part. And truly, and I'm not just trying to say this because of the times, but I don't know that we would have achieved that Super Bowl in the first year if it hadn't been for David Modell and the energy and the guidance that he gave us to put all the pieces in place.
Yeah, I think Art, in Art's passing, and Art was very patriarch, and everyone here knew of Art, and it was Art's team. I think David sort of preferred to, in a lot of ways, roll in the shadow of that while he got things done. But as I wrote, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Art, I loved Art. I mean, Art's picture's here sitting next to me as I do my show every day. Art was a broken down old guy when he got here, and not in good physical health by the time he got here. And, that was 2.5 years before you got here, that David did literally everything. Like, he was he ran the team. I mean, not just as the owner's son. He was the guy that picked the colors and the stadium and the logo and tell me a little bit about that interviewing process, because I know we've talked about it a little bit privately, but he had given me the week before I met you, 3 days before I met you, there was a snowstorm here, and I went up in the old offices in St. Paul, and he handed me 2 sheets of paper with a profile of what the next head coach was going to have, and I published it in Purple Rain 1. I know you've been privy to that. But when it came time to sit down, did you feel like you needed to win him over or Art over? Did you feel like you'd be working for David or for Art? Because I have a feeling on a day-to-day basis, as far as how everything ran, David just had so much more energy for it than Art did at that point, right? Yeah,
and you recognized, for me, the interview process, and I've told the story many times, was a 6-hour phone interview. It was literally over the phone, because the logistics did not, because of the way and how quickly it happened. And David headed up that group, and it was a tag team of David and then Ozzie and then Kevin Byrne, and Art chipped in just briefly, and then they'd start it over, and I'd get another round of people going through it. It was something that I'll always remember, and at the forefront of every one of those conversations was David Modell. And the thing that I appreciated, and you're exactly right about David's role, when I got here, and I'm trying to size up how things are put together and who does what and what's going on, obviously, and Art being the patriarch of the entire organization, and everybody respectful and deferential to Art, that David's the one that just kind of made everything happen. And the other thing I appreciated and saw very readily, that David was always about pushing somebody else out in front to get the credit or to be the voice of that, whether it was Art, whether it was Ozzy, whether it was me, was certainly anybody with the players. It was always David pushing. Anytime there was something, there was a bow to be taken, credit to be taken. Anytime there was a voice to be put out there, it was David that was saying, "Oh, let's have Brian do that. Let's have Ozzy do that. Let's have Art do that." It was always pushing somebody else out front to get the credit for the organization, which was certainly a collective movement by everybody, and David was wholly committed to that.
Well, I think in retrospect, and look, Coach, I don't think anybody's written or talked more about your successes or the championship. I mean, I'm the only one that wrote a book on it. 15 years later, I still talk about it and share it. And I know even Eric Edholm wrote like a 1996 Ravens retrospective of, what happened when the team got here and how many unique people, from the Scott Piolis and the Manginis and, the people that touched that Marvin, that were here when the thing got off the boat. But the one thing I hear about is, man, that Super Bowl 35 team, boy, that Billick was sure a smart coach. That Ozzy was sure a great drafter. And that Ogden and Lewis, boy, they were good. And, man, they brought in that Goose and that McCrary. And, boy, Boulware was a good draft pick. And, they figured the Dilfer thing out. And that defense was great. Marvin, what a great coach Marvin was. And look at Rex and Mike Smith. And, all of you got credit. No one ever says, well, David was kind of a genius for putting the whole thing together 20 years later, right? No one ever associates him with that in that way. And the bigger picture than that is what this franchise has become. And, Coach, that's what I took stock in this week and said, you came off the boat a little later than they did, but I've been here the whole time. And I know what the Orioles represented, and I know what the family was up against, and you knew on a national level what a villain Art was because you didn't go to work for him right away. You worked 3 years out somewhere else and, saw how their name was being dragged through the mud, nationally. And when you took the gig, you knew you were going to have to go back and play games in Cleveland and answer those questions, which you did. But I guess looking back on it, the totality of what this franchise is, which was an expansion franchise. David sort of ran an expansion franchise where they had to pick everything except the 20 or 30 players they were going to bring along with them and a couple of the front office people, that they had to start from scratch again. And if you look at the 21 years and the body of work of who they sold it to and Steve Bisciotti and who's coached the team and you and John and who the players have been and who the statues are going to be built for in the Hall of Fame and the way we've won championships and tickets through 2 generations now, think about this, Coach. Bill Bidwell could have brought the Cardinals here. Georgia Frontiere could have brought the Rams here. Bud Adams could have brought all of those possibilities. We could have had the Jacksonville expansion or the Carolina expansion. But in the end, no franchise has been more successful in 21 years as far as making the trains run on time and playing playoff games and having legends and having fan support and being as much an ownership of the community as the Ravens. And I want that to be known. That's what my bent is this week in trying to not just honor his life, but honor the accomplishment of what the Ravens represent here, because it really could have gone wrong here, Coach, right? Could have gone wrong for you when you got here, right?
Well, David was always about, his saying was always about a commitment to excellence. And that's all sounds well and good and very clinicky and great, that's a catchy phrase. And but David believed in that. He truly, and it was an extension of Art. Art was, in terms of the relationships with people, the fact of wanting to do everything first class. And that began with Art. But David embodied that and pushed that on the organization. And you're right, at a very tough time. You got to remember now when the Ravens came here, the economic situation they were dealing with through that entire time, that there was a lot to deal with. And you're right, David was at the heart of every one of those decisions, as were a lot of people, certainly within the organization, but really short of Art being the final say as the owner of the team, it was de facto David. David had to sign off and initiate, in many instances, the initiatives for all of those things. You're exactly right, and he deserves a great deal of credit for it. And you're right, probably doesn't get the credit that he deserves, the acknowledgement. But David was one that was, and on a personal note, it was always, it was just always upbeat, always smiling, always, how you doing? Particularly tough times. He'd come into the office with that, how you doing, Coach? Everything okay? What can I do? I always remember the story that when we're down in the Super Bowl, and I'm like every anal, retentive, obsessive coach. We're there, and I'm obsessed about all the little details. And if you remember in the hotel where we were, we'd come down to the second or third floor, wherever it was, where we had our entire administrative staff set up with all the things that you got to do in a Super Bowl. And I would come down there on a daily basis, in between meetings and practice or whatever, and just check, how we doing? How's this going? With everything. Wanted to make sure, was everything going okay? And at every turn, it was fine, going great, no problems. Everything's great. Never a problem. I thought, boy, we got this thing nailed. Come to find out later that David Modell had gotten the entire administrative staff together, the entire organization, made it very clear. Look, we know Coach is going to come down and check on all this stuff. I don't care if there's bodies in the closet. I don't care if buses have blown up. I don't care what has happened. When a coach asks, great, no problem, not a thing. Don't worry about it, Coach. It's fine. We got and that was David. David was going to make sure that everything was handled so that everybody could do their job and not be encumbered with anything that would distract from our ability to go to and win the Super Bowl.
His first admission there, lie to the coaches, just tell them everything's fine.
Yeah, that's right. My job number one.
Brian Billick joining us here, of course, our partner on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation. You can follow him out at Coach Billick. You were one of many, and this is probably an ultimate tribute to him, really, because, my wife chose me and I chose my wife, right? And, we sometimes you don't get to choose the people around you. You were in this really interesting spot where you had 3 or 4 choices. Cleveland, San Diego, you could have waited another year and found a different job, or waited for the right seat to open in the right place and just said, Eric DeCosta sat in the seat here for 20 years, and he's had a lot of chances to go other places. You didn't have to leave Minnesota at 15-1. There was no hard, fast rule about that. You chose here, and so did, by the way, Tony Siragusa. So did Michael McCrary. So did Shannon Sharp. So did Rod Woodson. So did Marvin Lewis. And yet part of it is you knew they were broke, Coach. You know what I mean? You knew there were some real challenges here in coming in. But you also saw that the new stadium had come online. Maybe part of that visit in December 13th, by the way. I looked up the date, Coach. You won 38-28 with Randall Cunningham. We didn't like you much then. You were in the wrong color purple that week. But, 6 weeks later, you were to become our coach and set off this incredible run of the last 20 years. But, there was something about it that said to you, these Modell guys are all right. Despite the fact that I've seen the Sports Illustrated cover and Modell getting kicked by the dogs and, all that stuff that was going on, you rose above it and chose here. And there must have been, you've done your own homework on this, right? Ray Anderson was your guy, and, someone said to you that David's not Fredo. He's not a crazy kid. Not just you could put the projector on and see that Ray Lewis could play a little bit, and you had some young linebackers that could run around a little bit because you knew that. But I'm talking about a situation. I think fans just say, well, he'll go there for the quarterback or he'll go there for the player. Boy, it's a lot more complicated than that when you're talking about picking up 2 young daughters and a wife in Minnesota and signing on the purple boat here for a couple of guys that had been kicked around pretty good in the press, right?
Yeah, and what convinced me was, because I did my homework as well, obviously, on the organization, because you want to be prudent about what situation you're coming into. And 2 things that jump out at me. One, I found as I did my preparation to choosing the making the choice to come to Baltimore, and one I found out afterwards, once I got here. The first one was just how many good people they had here. The regard that people had for Ozzie Newsome and Kevin Byrne and Bill Tessendorf, the trainer, and just across the board, so many people in the organization that were just so highly thought of that made it very clear that Art and David and that organization knew how to hire and attract good people, and that obviously was very important. But then when I got here and found out how really not only how competent they were, but and as you alluded to it earlier, I do a lot of corporate speaking. And when I visit with CEOs and heads of organizations, when I'm going to go speak to their organization and find out, okay, what is your mission statement? What is this convention about? What message are you trying to get across? At some point, people are going to talk about culture. When they talk about culture, they're talking about what? Team, family. Everybody's trying to build in the business environment that sense of family. You came to the Baltimore Ravens and you met Art and David and everybody involved, and you saw the confidence. the competence. And then as the longer you're around them, the more you recognize there is that sense of family. That sense of family that Art and David and Pat and John and that family extended to the entire organization, and the true affection that the organization had for Art, because everybody in that organization owes Art or a David or that family there was some act of kindness that they had done over the number of years. That true family atmosphere, I think David helped embody that.
Coach Billick joining us here. You know, it's this was not lost on me either. I mean, you always call yourself an L.A. boy, and, you know, your teams all disappeared out there, and now two teams are going in there. And I guess to, you know, circle back on what I said about what time shows you over 21 years, can you imagine the San Diego Chargers or the L.A. Rams, either one of those franchises, 21 years from now, looking back with one a front office person, with 3 head coaches and a tree of another dozen head coaches around the league, and 2 Super Bowl parades, and everyone in L.A. from the minute you get off the plane wearing one of the 2 colors and having sellouts for 21 years. I mean, there are 2 franchises going out to L.A. right now trying to do this, and the reason they're there is they couldn't get it done in the last place, right? And there was a little bit of perception of that if Art and David knew what they were doing, they would have figured Cleveland out. Politically, it was a lot deeper than that, and there was a lot more that, you know, books have been written on that, if anybody's read Fumble or any of the other stories that came out of Cleveland. But, you know, I think any franchise would look at those 20 years. I mean, right now, these franchises playing hokey pokey out on the West Coast, they're not going to have that kind of success. They're not going to come close to that kind of success.
Yeah, the odds are prohibitive. You're exactly right. And when people look back on them moving, and you're right, having come from L.A. where my Rams had moved, and then coming into an environment where in Baltimore where we had a team that had left Cleveland, and the city on the reverse side had lived through the emotional loss of their Colts that went to Indianapolis. And I was foreign to it and had to learn. I remember going over to Memorial Stadium when they were going to tear it down. And this before, you know, I'm the coach and don't even know if anybody knows who I am. And just walking around the stadium with the fans. They had opened it up just to walk around and get a feel for it. And the fans coming up and telling me stories about the Colts and about Baltimore, and really beginning to start to get the feel for what this meant to this city, and now the Ravens and the loss of the Colts and the like, and really getting ingrained into it. Yeah, it's a lot, and people I don't think can fully appreciate it, and the fact that they came from Cleveland, where under the given circumstances that they had to deal with, it would have been impossible, not improbable, impossible to stay in Cleveland and be successful. Compared to the new group that came in and then got the things that had Art been given those things to make it work with the new stadium and the things that they needed to do, would have stayed in Cleveland. And so to come into this environment here and to do what they did, and you're right, the 21-year run that they've had, I got to believe that the Chargers and the Rams would give their eye teeth to come close to that type of level of success.
Not every coach would have loved having the owner's son be the president, who was 40 feet to your right, chomping on a cigar and dog cussing the officials on your behalf as well. David was ever present on the sidelines, and I don't know that anybody here really found that weird, because he always was, but I could see on the outside where the Mark Cuban types and the Dan Snyder types, and you know what, the thought of what ego would be about. And I've tried to sort of come to terms with that with David on the sidelines, because that was just like his natural habitat. Like, that's where he wanted to be. It wasn't like some big show. You were always, man, always. I was there for every win, every loss. You were always in better spirits and more together after a loss than Kevin Byrne, than a lot of people. I mean, he was very tough to compose himself after losing. He was, dare I say, more competitive than you. Certainly wore it on his sleeve a little bit more, right?
Well, David, because he loved the game. He'd been the ball boy and done virtually every job up and down the ranks of the team. He loved being on the side. And you're right, but it wasn't about him. He wasn't on the field so people could say, oh, yeah, that's David Modell. He wasn't down there for that reason. He was down there because he just loved the energy of it. He loved the competitiveness of it. He loved to compete in that way and get as close to it as he possibly could realizing he wasn't going to be a player. He wasn't going to be a coach. This was the charge that he got out of it, and very superstitious. Had a number of superstitions that he'd have across the board, but always energetic, and I appreciated having him down there because there was that energy, and he had that love for the game. And you're right. After the games, after the losses, he took it hard, but he was always very careful. He never brought that around me. He never laid that on me. Never, ranted and raved or boy, why are we doing this or just was always going to be upbeat. Oh, we'll get him next time. Or yeah, I got you, coach. And
did he talk football with you like in that way? I mean, like you said, he never said why did we pass instead of run. I find that to be a fascinating thing to come off your tongue. I mean,
never once
really
did he intimate. Now I'm sure, behind closed doors, and maybe somebody else, he'd question this or that and have an opinion like everybody does. But he would never lay that on me because to what end? Why? Why would you do that? Just to create attention or to begin to think you know something that you don't. And David wouldn't do that. He was going to always be upbeat and positive and always moving forward, and very much appreciated him for that.
All right, so here's your chance to smile, and I'll put you on the spot. He had 1 million superstitions. I wrote about one of them in NS. Give me your favorite. I mean, come on, he had hundreds of superstitions. He was crazy like that.
It's hard for me to pull out the exact one. Although I always call them routines. And
routines.
We don't call them.
Well, you had it too. You walked the same way every week. You had your own little thing, right?
One of my routines in any game, and particularly at home, is before I would go in and change and get in my coaching garb or whatever, is whether we got there by the bus or whether I was walking over during a home game, I would go out and I would come out and I'd usually have some kind of media thing to do or to Jerry Sandusky or something, and then I would go and walk from one end zone to the other, from one goal line to the other, every week. I don't know why. I don't know how I started it, but I did it every single week. And David recognized that. I'm sorry.
Your dogs recognize it too. It's okay. We're good.
Okay, I'll start over.
No, it's fine. We're good.
Okay.
Keep going.
And David recognized that. And so, particularly if we were on a winning streak, he always forgot about those routines. You did those routines when you lost too. But if you got on a little bit of a winning streak, I remember in the Super Bowl run, once we started going, and we, were on this 11-game running streak, and Dave would come down, and every game, he'd say, "Did you walk the field?" Just to check, did you walk?
So he had a superstition about your superstition.
Exactly right, as though that we were. If I didn't do that, and like I wouldn't. But he'd come in, and whether it's when I'm pregame warm-up, whatever, and he'd come over and goes, "You walked the field, right? You walked the field before." And I go, and sometimes I'd screw with him and go, "No, I didn't have the time to do it," and freak him a little bit. No, I did it. So he had superstitions about my routine.
Billick, just when I think I know everything about you, I learned something new. You pulled me back in. It's been a sad week around here, but I tell you, Coach, I saw your wife, and I know you had a speaking engagement. It was it's been unbelievable to celebrate it all and look back, and and I had Goose on a little while ago, and to be in that church and to see, David being laid to rest and to hear a U2 song, one being played by his brother and sung by Michelle Miller, who used to sing the national anthem every week during your era for sure, and to see Ray Lewis, Steve Bisciotti, Tony Siragusa, Michael McCrary, Rob Burnett come down from New Jersey, all his guys walk in there in the front row and pay tribute to him. It was an incredible celebration. It's given me an incredible chance to catch up with you and Mike Flynn and Kim Herring and Kyle Richardson and so many of the people that I know were amongst the greatest thing that you did professionally, right?
No question about it. I'm just heartsick that I wasn't able to make it. I had a prior obligation that it really just could not get out of, and my wife Kim, as you said, went and to sit with her when I got home last night and just listen. She just took me blow by blow through the entire service and the stories that were told, and John and talking about some of the stories that they had.
Most courageous thing I've ever seen, his wife.
Yeah.
Most courageous thing I've ever seen on Tuesday. I mean that. It was incredible.
It was great to hear, and you're right. That's what you need to do. You need to remember him for all the good things and all the great stories, and it's great to hear the stories about him.
Love you, Coach. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for coming on and remembering David. And we'll talk football next week. We'll see you in Houston. I'm sure we'll have a Super Bowl to talk about there, but I just wanted to make it all about David because that's what was on our mind here this week.
Absolutely, man.
Appreciate you, Coach. There he goes, Coach Billick. You can follow him out on Twitter and, of course, anywhere the NFL Network is served between now and Super Bowl week. He'll be down in Houston with us at Super Bowl 51, not 55, 51. I'm going to get ahead of myself. We might win 52, 53, 50. Wouldn't it be nice if we won Super Bowl 52? Some poetry there in motion for Ray Lewis, and he's going to go in the Hall of Fame next year, too. We'll see. We got a lot of work to do here in the offseason. You can find my tribute to David Modell as well as everything else out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault at WNST.net. You can also get our morning newspaper shipped to your email inbox where my blog lived, and Luke's been looking at all off-season issues. We got Orioles, Terps, Caps, Wizards. All that good stuff comes to you every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford Security Boulevard, and Dennis Kolatzis will be here this Thursday and every Thursday driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend ahead. Nasty at WNST.net reaches me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNS TV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.